1. My husband and I have always been cat people. In fact, we wouldn't have been able to marry non-animal people. Pets are essential for a comfortable and civilized home, don't you think? Just before we got married, many years ago, we adopted 2 baby kitten litter mates at our local humane society on impulse. They were only 5 weeks old, and had already been there for a week. Far too young to be away from their mama. Tiny little shivering tuxedo kitties, a girl and a boy, huddled together, and absolutely terrified. It was obvious we had to take them both. Because they were so young, they bonded to us like no other cats ever have before or since. Astrid was very much a daddy's girl, and Siegfried was a mama's boy. This was a given from the start. They were always the closest of buddies, as litter mates who have been raised together usually are. Astrid was short-haired, brave as a lion, dumb as a rock, with amazing instincts, considering she hadn't had the benefit of her mother teaching her anything. Astrid was one of the best hunters I'd ever seen, and a ferocious scrapper. She could even bring down crows. Her brother was a beautiful long hair, big and sensitive and timid. Despite his puffed chest posturing and macho bulging, neighborhood tomcats would try to start fights with him, and he would shriek, bring Astrid on the run to beat up whoever was trying to mess with her brother. Siegfried, to his disgrace, wouldn't even stick around to help her. He'd run to the door and start scratching on it frantically to be let in. Astrid was an extremely expensive cat in the long term. In our early years, my husband and I were stone broke, and we racked up I don't know how many thousands of dollars on our credit cards for all kinds of Astrid disorders and mishaps. We flew her up to Seattle for radiation treatments for her thyroid. Her liver almost failed, necessitating week-long stays at the vets. She broke all the bones in one foot once by catching it on a patio bench. She stopped eating several times and got terribly thin. My husband would grind up dry food, make a porridge from it, and hand-feed her with a syringe. Yet we never really minded all the trouble and expense because she always managed to bounce back from the brink of death, right up until her final illness. Astrid was always so single-minded and stubborn. She was an affectionate juggernaut. Siegfried died of cancer a few years before his sister, which was heartbreaking. Astrid lived to be about 15 years old. Just before her own death from cancer, we moved into a new house. Instead of a cramped, dark bungalow, our new house was bright and roomy, with big windows everywhere, and, even better yet, from the standpoint of an arthritic cat who loved to play in water, it had a doorless walk-in shower. Astrid just loved that house, and we were so glad she got to enjoy it for a while. Our backyard lets out onto BLM land, and after we brought her home from her final visit to the vets, we buried her under a big sagebrush bush which we could see from our living room. Knowing Astrid's indomitable will and rather dim intellect, plus her fondness of the new house, I guess we shouldn't have been surprised when she came back. It started out with glimpses out of the corner of the eye for both me and my husband. Although we didn't mention it to one another until after the noises began, distinctive Astrid noises would happen mainly at night, when our 2 other kitties were accounted for and sleeping on our bed with us. The loud bonk of her head against the underside of the coffee table. We had that table for years, and she never did learn not to stand up under it. The thought of her jumping off the dining room table, the rustling and rummaging through the garbage bag in the kitchen looking for treats, the sharp jing of a cat toy being slapped at in passing. Then Astrid joining us in bed. My husband would distinctly feel her weight as it landed on the bed and stumped clumsily across his legs. And we could see everything on the bed very clearly. Nothing visible was causing it. To make things more interesting, Cow Kitty, aka CK, the black spotted white feral cat we had tamed and adopted, would greet her by lifting his head in her direction and cordially saying, "Prrrr," in that sweet way he had. One of Astrid's habits in life was wedging herself between my head and my husband's. Since she really was his kitty, she'd leverage her butt against my sleeping face in order to really position herself for a thorough kneading of Daddy's neck, sometimes for hours at a time, purring the whole time. He'd get a sore neck, and I would wake up to a mouthful of cat hair. So during one of her incorporeal visits, I woke up to hear loud purring between us. Nothing was there, just purring. My neck hairs tried to crawl up to the top of my head. You know that feeling you get when all your senses start to ratchet up? But then I thought, it's just Astrid. She loves us, and she'd never hurt us. And I relaxed completely and went back to sleep. No big deal. In fact, some nights when the noises began while my husband and I read in bed, we'd look at each other and start laughing. And did I mention that my husband is a skeptic who's very uncomfortable with discussing the paranormal? Even he started taking it for granted. CK, too, would often peer with great concentration into our bedroom doorway from his spot on the bed. He'd murmur a question or a greeting at our visitor, and lay his head down on his paws again. Not everyone was so casual about Astrid. We got our kitten, Flashman, a loud, bold, brassy Maine Coon. Flashman would often stare at the bedroom door, fizz up, and hide between our pillows, with his butt sticking out. But then again, Flashman was never properly introduced to Astrid in life, like CK was. Eventually I was concerned that Astrid didn't understand she was dead, and would be upset that we were snubbing or ignoring her. I would call out to her that we loved her, but that she needed to get going to where she needed to be. Our vet told us that cats often come back after death in a new form to be with us again. If so, Astrid was delaying the process by spending her nights stomping around the house and bonking her head on the underside of our coffee table. I think she finally got the point. Astrid was very strong-willed and single-minded, but even she could sometimes catch a clue. Eventually, she stopped visiting. I've told lots of people my Astrid experiences, and I can tell they don't know if I'm joking. I am known for having a pretty dry sense of humor, or if I'm just simply crazy. However, I've read a lot of real-life accounts which indicate that our experiences with Astrid aren't so much out of the ordinary. All the same, it takes quite a special cat to come back, regardless of how much it loved its owners. It really doesn't surprise me in the least that Astrid managed it. 2. Backstory. Many years ago, I shared an upstairs apartment with my younger brother. The house was an old Victorian house that was converted to up and down units. My brother lived downstairs with his wife and young daughter. My parents owned this house, so we got fairly cheap rent, so it was a no-brainer. Or so we thought. So I have lived in this apartment for about a year with no issues. My roommate brother also had no issues. Well, one night that all changed. My bedroom was directly above my niece's room. As I said, my brother lived below us. Anyway, it was around 2:30 a.m., and I woke up with this rocking sound, like an old rocking chair rocking across a wooden floor. It made a very distinct sound, back and forth, over and over, probably 5 minutes. Well, I knew my niece, who was only a baby, would get rocked at night if she was fussy, so I didn't think anything of it. At first, anyway. Around 3:30 again, I woke up to this rocking back and forth sound. But now I hear my niece crying, so I'm a little pissed because twice I've been woken up. I lay there waiting for my sister-in-law to quiet the kid. No, louder and louder. My niece is screaming incredibly loud for 10 minutes while this rocking is going on. I was tired and exhausted from hearing this racket for 10 to 15 minutes. Her crying, chair rocking. Then it stopped. Everything, rocking, crying, everything. Weird, right? So I finally go back to sleep. Sure as fuck at 4:10, just rocking. No baby again. This time I hear singing. Like a lullaby, but in a very old voice. Now, at the time, my sister-in-law was 23, so not her. I was freaked out because I knew no one old was visiting. This episode lasted 5 minutes or so. I'm freaked the fuck out because I know this is weird. I go to sleep when it stopped finally. The next day I get up and I'm a bit pissed and uneasy because of what I heard. I talked to my brother and said, what gives? I was up multiple times last night because of Stacy crying and you guys rocking and singing to her. I told him it was way too loud and long. Next time put a rug under the rocking chair at least, to make it quiet. I wasn't mad at the crying. He said, What are you talking about? We got rid of the rocking chair a few weeks ago. I was floored. I told him the story of what happened the night before. Get this. My niece never was up that night at all. You know why? She was with her mom staying at her grandma's house last night. I was freaked. He said he slept the whole night and heard nothing. Crazy, right? So I learned that this house I had the upstairs apartment in. Apparently the room below my bedroom, my niece's room, was used as a viewing room. Yes, back in the turn of the century, people would put dead people on display in a large room with a big window, so anyone walking by could stare in and pay respects. Now that's creepy. My parents said everyone who died in my little town, population 1,200 in 1980, 700 in the 1900s, was put in the room and propped up to be viewed. Holy fuck, that's creepy shit. So I think some old lady who died was rocking her dead baby that night. No other explanation. I heard it. Still freaked a bit recalling this story. 3. I was staying at my mom's house while she and my stepdad were on vacation in the Smokies. They went there twice a year in spring and fall. I took care of her pets and the place while they were gone. I asked a friend of mine if he wanted to stay one night to have a paranormal experience. I had been telling him stories about that place for years, and he didn't seem to believe. But he was interested in experiencing something like that himself, so this was the perfect time to do it. He showed up in the evening with his girlfriend. I wasn't expecting his girlfriend to be with him, so I explained what they were there for and asked if she was okay with what could happen. She said if it got scary, she'd just leave, so we went in. I took them up to the attic in my older brother's room first. We went all the way inside, and I started telling stories about the poltergeist activity we had in that house since we moved in, including stories about the barn. I figured that might get them prepared for when it got dark. The attic we were standing in was the most active place in the house. I wouldn't have gone in there alone. The little door to the attic moved and shook all night long, every night since we moved in, as well as scratching and thumping coming from inside there most nights. Some of it could be debunked as wind or mice or someone walking downstairs. But most times there was no explanation. Upstairs in that house was the perfect place for him to have a paranormal experience, since the attic was so active. The barn is active, but a little more dangerous to have an experience in. Plus, you have to be alone in the barn for anything to happen. The house didn't care how many people there were. While I was telling stories, I noticed a stack of encyclopedias that were in disarray. I picked one up that was on the floor next to the stack and put it on top of the stack. Then I straightened out the stack so it was all neat. I'm a little OCD about that stuff. I wouldn't even mention it if it wasn't relevant. We went out to the barn, and I showed them some things and told a couple more stories. It was starting to get dark, so we went upstairs in the house and sat around talking for a while. Before you know it, the attic doors start rattling. Both of their jaws dropped. I had a feeling he didn't believe the stuff I was telling him. There was no one else in the house, and it was dead calm outside, so there was no debunking this. His girlfriend immediately wanted to leave. He somehow talked her into staying, even though the attic door was rattling the whole time. I told them that door rattled every night. It was harmless, and we just got used to it when we lived there. We relaxed a bit and started talking again for a while. Then, a little later, other noises started happening. It sounded like something being scooted across the floor in there. She was ready to leave again, but stayed at his request. The scooting noise changed to thumping that rattled the door violently for a while. She sat through all that, looking scared but tolerating it. Then things seemed to get quiet for a while, so we relaxed a bit again. After a few minutes, there was a loud sound that sounded like someone dropped a book flat on the floor. We all jumped. It was loud enough to scare us. She got up and said, "That's it, I'm leaving." So she turned on the light and went right out to the car. He stayed with me, so I didn't have to stay in the house alone. She came back to pick him up the next morning. Before she got there, we went into the attic to see if there was any sign of what we heard in there. The first thing we noticed was a stack of encyclopedias was messed back up. and the one book was back on the floor. Maybe I shouldn't have messed with the encyclopedia. 4. I do contracted private security, and about a month ago, I transferred to a bank in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. I thought, banks are usually small. Are you going to fit a whole staff of security guards and employees in a tiny building? But little did I know that this wasn't just any bank. This was the headquarters location, and has been around for a pretty long time. There are at least 4 buildings. I've heard 5, but I have no idea where the last building is. And the first 2 were originally built in 1906 and 1912, but the bank didn't take over until mid-20s. When I first started, several of the other officers started telling me stories about it being allegedly haunted. Seeing as though I've always been pretty sensitive to the paranormal, I'm no psychic by any means, my curiosity was piqued. My 3rd day training, I was taken to this building where one of the supervisors had supposedly seen a full-on apparition. He was looking around in the sub-basement where a lot of the old vault doors are. Not gonna lie, that was really cool to see. And when he opened the door, he saw a little girl dressed in a Victorian dress. He says that the surprised look on her face matched his, and when he opened his mouth to say something, she was gone. My first day by myself, I'm patrolling the floors. It's the weekend, no one is there, and I'm thinking that everything is going to be as smooth as the icing on the cake that is this job. I'm on a floor looking through the window of a door to make sure nothing is on that shouldn't be. And it looked as though a face was coming towards mine from the other side of the window. Keep in mind that it's pretty dark. I pull my face back, and notice that the other face is also pulling back. So I assumed that it was just my reflection. I felt a little weary, but kept moving on. I go to the floor beneath that one. I'm standing in silence, to make sure I don't hear any personal heaters going. All of a sudden, I hear a loud right behind me. It felt like it was my mom getting mad at something I did, because that's how she would always react when I was younger. At that point, you can best believe that I got the hell off that floor. So my question for you guys is, what in-depth information do you have about the R.A. Long building? I've briefly read about the lady who paid an engineer 10 cents to take her to the very top, and she jumped off. I've also heard about a little boy who supposedly fell down an elevator shaft, anywhere from the 5th to 7th floor when the construction was still going on, but couldn't reach help in time before an elevator crushed him. But I haven't physically read anything about that. I've also heard, but never read, about how there was a big banking associate back in the day who shot himself in the head in what is now the museum. Do you have any links to good articles I could read regarding that information? 5. This was about 10 years ago. My mom had just gotten married to my stepdad. After the wedding, we went for the reception, so sort of like a celebratory after-party with my family and friends, etc. More people were there than the actual wedding. The venue was a hotel that had a large ground floor that was a bar, and ball and dining room and some other functional rooms all joined. Then, as it was a hotel, there are about 5 other floors accessed by lift and a staircase that looped around in sort of a square going up. Anyway, so after we'd all had a meal in the hall, there was a party. Myself, my younger brother, who would have been 6, my stepsister, who would have been 8 or 9, my cousin, who would have been 8 or 9 as well, and my friend, whose family had come, same age as me. I decided to explore the upper floors where all the rooms are, mostly because we were curious children, but also because we wanted to see what floors the rooms we'd be staying in. I shared a room with my grandmother, who was in the party downstairs, so we were exploring the 3rd floor, which my room was on, and I started to feel uneasy, like I had a sick feeling of dread. So I told our little group we should leave and go back to the party. I didn't tell them I was scared of the floor. They all went past me to go downstairs, and for whatever reason I lingered, with my back to the hallway facing the stairs. I stayed for a few moments, and everyone was already going down the stairs quite far ahead of me. And I felt something I'll never forget. I suddenly felt cold, as if there was a breath on my neck, and I felt honest to God something touch my arm that for some reason I feel was a claw. Sort of like a withered hand. And I fucking bolted down those stairs, running as fast as my legs would take me, jumping the last 3 steps just to return to what my young mind saw as safety in the party. And for the next hour I had forgot about it. Anyway, a few hours later it gets to 12 at night, and guests that aren't staying or leaving, and the family and friends staying at the hotel start saying goodbye and going to rooms. So I hug my mum, say goodnight to everyone, and go with my grandma back to the 3rd floor and to our room. I had no trouble getting to sleep. But a key thing is that I was so very tired and just fell asleep in my bed in my clothes. Smart trousers, smart shirt and tie. I woke up the next morning without my trousers, which is odd enough, but my grandma told me that she'd woken up sometime between 3 and 4, and I noticed that I wasn't in bed. She went back to sleep thinking that I had gone to the toilet, and said that she was woken up again not long after by a knocking on the door. It was me knocking on the door. I had sleepwalked out of the room, and must have been wandering the corridors. I have no recollection of leaving the room or walking around. In the past, I have talked in my sleep, spoken to myself or screamed, and I still do this, much to my mum's annoyance. But I've never sleepwalked before. This really freaked me out at the time, and, well, it still does, as I have no idea what happened to me or what I did. I feel as though whatever had touched me had a part in me leaving the room and wandering around. I hesitate to say I was possessed, but I don't know what else to call it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 158. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And I'd just like to give a special shout out to Coffee Addict 92, the security guard in story number 4, with the interesting bank who is looking for some help and information. If you guys do have any information for Coffee Addict, you can either post it in the comments below, or you can click on through to the link in the description that will take you through to the Reddit post, and you could send them a message over there. Okay, with that I think I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.